Well, looks like school came a couple of days early. Interstellar is directed by Christopher Nolan, co-written by him and his brother Jonathan Nolan, and stars Matthew McConaughey, Anne Hathaway, Jessica Chastain, and Michael Caine. And in Interstellar, Earth is pretty much turning into a wasteland. We're running out of food. And Cooper, played by Matthew McConaughey, is this former NASA test pilot and engineer who is now a farmer like everybody else. But one day he recognizes these gravitational anomalies that leads him to this bunker where the remnants of NASA are planning this last-ditch effort to save humanity. So they enlist Cooper's help to leave his family and go off into space through a wormhole next to Saturn out into a new galaxy and to find a planet that humanity can inhabit. Interstellar might just be the most hyped up movie I've ever seen in my entire life because everybody was ready to watch this movie. I mean, it's been in production for God knows how long. Christopher Nolan got an actual theoretical physicist to be an executive producer in this movie. Jonathan Nolan, if I'm not mistaken, went back to college or something just to study relativity. And everyone on Earth, including myself, was so hyped up from the moment this thing was even announced. And it's here, and Interstellar has absolutely mind-blowing visuals, some of Hans Zimmer's best music, which is saying a lot. Great performances from all the actors, especially Matthew McConaughey, and of course great direction from Christopher Nolan. I just don't think it's written very well. At this point, I feel like I have to make a couple of disclaimers for myself because when you talk about Christopher Nolan's movies, it gets a bit sensitive for some people. So, number one, because I mentioned the hype earlier, trust me when I say that I did not let the hype affect the way I viewed this movie or critiqued it or anything. I consider myself very good at sitting down and just stripping myself of expectations. Disclaimer number two, remember that every review is just someone's opinion. Everything I will say here is my opinion. So if you think this movie is the best thing ever, I'm really happy for you, honestly. But if I say something negative or you don't agree with it, don't think that I'm doing it just because I don't like the Christopher Nolan fanboys and I want to fight against them. I love Christopher Nolan's movies. I wanted this movie to be amazing. It just was not amazing. It was good. First of all, the one thing everyone will agree on about this movie is that it looks absolutely incredible. The space visuals are just so awe-inspiring. Their scale is just overwhelming, but what's great is that all the visual effects here, while they're very grandiose, they're all rooted in real science. So all of it feels very possible. Even stuff like the wormhole, which I believe I read somewhere, someone told me that no one really knows how to visualize a wormhole. The way they did it here is like the most realistic way so far. And then the black hole looks great, like all the small things like, frozen clouds and whatnot. None of this stuff looks outlandish. It all feels very possible. For a movie that takes place so much in space, everything is so grounded in reality, especially like the production design. It felt like those old sci-fi movies from the 70s, like Star Wars, like all the tech has this like really rusty quality about it, and it makes everything feel a bit more fragile and vulnerable, like the people in space. It makes the crew feel very vulnerable. And it's great that Christopher Nolan is so dedicated to using practical effects whenever he can. So like all the locations you see in this movie, like the frozen wasteland on the poster, the place with the water, like I'm pretty sure that's all real. And the robots and the ship and stuff, I'm pretty sure that's all real too. Cinematography has this grainy quality to it that really made me feel like I was watching like Alien back in 1979. And Nolan does have his use of like really amazing wide shots. And what's great about the camera work in this movie is that when we suddenly get a shot of like the ship from outside or in space and whatever, there's no disconnect. It doesn't feel like you jump to a different movie. It doesn't feel fake at all. It feels like they shot this thing in space. And just like many other recent films about space, there is no sound in space, and that's great because it reminds you how vast everything is, and it reminds you how lonely being in space is and how you're so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. The sound is generally very good, although I had a hard time understanding McConaughey's accent and Michael Caine's accent for a while, then I got used to it. But Hans Zimmer's score in this movie is so good because it really combines like this 70s creepiness like that from old like horror and sci-fi movies, combines that with his typical like really grand themes that when they come on it just feels like you're struggling. It's like the human struggle in music form. The way this movie is edited I also really like because it ties together the stuff that happens on Earth with the stuff that happens in space. Despite the distance, despite the time difference, it all feels like it's in one story. And it really reminds us of the scale of everything and like what's at stake. And it really does keep us tense throughout the movie. And speaking of tense, there are a number of really tense moments that are just made all the more intense by how limited the supplies are and by, how fragile the people are inside the ship, inside the suits. And I also like how abrupt the leaps forward in time are because there's some moments when Connie and Hathaway and stuff will be on a planet's surface, and when they come back up, like so much time has progressed. So I like how we get to see it from Cooper's point of view, because we're just as surprised when we come back on board and decades have passed. And in terms of acting, there's absolutely no weak performance in the movie. Everyone really brought their A game. Like even the kids were really, really good, and I think everyone's so good because everyone's just so darn scared. I really like how Anne Hathaway's character, Amelia Brand, if I'm not mistaken, who's she's a NASA scientist, and you first meet her on Earth, and she's really confident and stuff. But once she gets to space, like that confidence is gone. She is just scared. Jessica Chastain plays this woman who stays on Earth and tries to help out NASA. And it's great how she really has like raw emotion, and she communicates with the crew members, but they get her messages really late. But even if they get them late, like her emotion really just kind of transcends those spatial limitations. And Michael Caine plays an actual character in this movie. Like I don't think he's wasted at all. He's like a real person with real regret in him. And I really like the robots in this movie. There are a couple of robots in this movie who are actually pretty cool because they added a lot of levity to the situation. They were really funny, and I actually kind of cared more about the robots than the humans. But of course, the stand-on performance here is Matthew McConaughey, because he charges every single moment with this urgency, this human spirit. And even when they're just kind of talking about science on the ship, which happens quite a bit, he really just adds so much emotion to it. And there's certain moments when he cries and stuff, and you really feel his pain. You feel so many emotions when he cries. And as a director, of course, Christopher Nolan is an expert at knowing how to approach like the incomprehensible, because for other directors who tackle like subject matter this big, they might not even know where to begin with it. But Christopher Nolan really knows how to keep everything just so amazing to behold, even if you don't necessarily understand everything. This movie is 2 hours and 50 minutes long, and you really do feel the length, but it never drags. And I think that's a credit to Nolan, because he really knows how to keep you in awe and how to keep you kind of unsure of what's going to happen next. The tone in this movie is actually pretty bleak, kind of like The Dark Knight Rises, but I think it's balanced just with the sheer rush of space exploration. It's cool how Nolan's able to balance those two out. However, we get to the writing, and while I was able to really follow the story in its first two acts, by the time the third act rolls in, and you'll know what I'm talking about when you see this, it's when Cooper gets to a certain place. Um, it just completely lost me. Like I just really didn't buy anything anymore. I wouldn't say that the third act loses realism, because God knows if it's gonna be possible in like 100 years or something. But what bothered me was it was so Deus Ex Machina. It didn't feel like the characters were earning their way out of the situation. It just felt like they were given a cheat code, and it was just so unbelievably convenient for them. I also really didn't care about the secondary characters. Like you only really care about McConaughey and maybe the robots, but everyone else is just kind of expendable. So when bad things happen to them, it doesn't affect you like I think Nolan wanted us to feel. And while the movie is good at being able to bounce between Earth and space and Earth and space, the stuff that happens on Earth is actually kind of boring in my opinion. But my biggest issue with this movie really is just with the script, because there's a point like halfway through the movie where I realized I was just kind of nodding my head and accepting what they were saying about science and whatnot, but I didn't really know what was happening. And one of the most annoying comments I've seen on other reviews is that people will suddenly say, like really arrogantly, that the reviewer or the critic has no right to review the movie if they didn't understand all the science stuff. And I think that's ridiculous. You don't need to be a scientist to watch a movie. And are you seriously telling me that I don't have, I'm not entitled to my opinion if I didn't understand all the science in a sci-fi movie? Let's look at it this way. Filmmakers, in a way, are like teachers in class. Their job is to communicate to the audience or to the student. And so it's not always the student's fault if he doesn't understand it, because I will swear to you that I really tried to understand this movie. I know a lot of other people did also. But the fact that it just came off as so heavy, and like all this information just came at us so quickly, like it is kind of also the fault of the filmmakers, because it was not given to us in an accessible way. That's what I'm looking for. I'm not even looking for like feasibility or like how accurate these facts are. I'm just looking for, creatively written things and how accessible they are to the audience so that they can get an emotional reaction from it. But I didn't get an emotional reaction from all this science stuff. But it's really not all about theory for me. It really is all about execution. And to illustrate the point, let's look at Inception, because Inception was very complex also, but it was explained in such a way that you could kind of understand it. But the point really was driven home when you saw that theory, put into execution. You saw how that theory worked physically in the world. You could perceive it. But here, because everything is just so theoretical, when things happen, you don't really see how that connects with the things that are happening. In my opinion, this movie really did sacrifice a lot of time just to explain the science behind it, when the more important part really was just to, connect with the audience. I really think Nolan forgot that a bit. And, while we can commend them for being smart, I can't really commend them for kind of losing me and losing lots of other people. But other than that, just because I have that problem with the movie doesn't mean I don't think this movie is really good. It's a really good movie. You have to see it. You still have to see it. It's an event movie. Last point, another really arrogant thing I hear from a lot of people is that, oh, you're just bashing this movie because you don't understand it. It'll be a classic years later, like 2001: Space Odyssey. Well, newsflash, lots of people still don't really like 2001. I mean, I haven't seen it yet, but I know a lot of people still find it boring. And it's true for any movie. Any movie could be a classic in 10 years or whatever. So, Nolan doesn't have exclusive rights to that. Alright, so that's my review for Interstellar. What about you guys? Did you guys enjoy it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.